Hey everyone, Sergei here from ukramedia.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to auto-size your text to the width and the height of your shape layer, this rectangular shape layer. And we're going to do that using obviously After Effects and expressions. So it's going to look something like this. We have this shape right here, and we have the X and the Y, the width and the height. And if I adjust the width, you can see the text follows with it. It maintains the aspect ratio, which is really handy. But not only that, it is also smart enough to know if the height of my text becomes smaller than the text, it will also adjust. So like this. There you have it. So it will also adjust. And not only that, you can adjust the padding. So I can go over here and maybe add some padding or margin, right, for the X, maybe like 50 pixels. And it doesn't matter if I adjust the shape, it will always maintain that 50 pixel margin on the X. And you can also have multi-line text, like this, and it will also adjust to that and it will stay within the shape. I'm going to show you how to do that, obviously using expressions, but let me show you how quickly it is to create the same thing using the tools that I wrote at ukramedia.com. So watch this. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do ukramedia.com text, center the anchor point, Control Home. And then I'm going to use this Smart Sizer. It's a new script we just released. So I'm going to click on this button, which will determine the limit of this text. In other words, the current length, it's going to maintain that. So it doesn't matter what I type. As soon as it hits that limit, it's going to start sizing down, which is really handy. And then I'm going to select it, and we're going to go over here to anchor point. I'm going to make sure that it stays at center. And then that's the first step. We're going to go to Smart Rect, and in here we're going to create a rectangular shape for this selected layer. So whatever you have selected, it's going to create a shape layer that's the exact same width and height. So we're going to go over here and I'm going to click on this button. I want the anchor point to be in the center. And there you have it. So we do have a shape and a text. So next, what I want to do, I want to link up the width and the height of my text to the width and the height of my Smart Rect. So I'm going to select this, press E to reveal all of my effects to see all of this in here. And for the text, we want the width and the height. I'm going to select both of them, hit S twice to solo it. And for Smart Rect right here, we're going to select the X and the Y size. We're going to select it, press S twice to solo it. And then it's pretty simple. I'm going to say width of the text. Let's link you up to the width of the shape, and height of the text. Let's do the same thing. And now if I select the shape and if I adjust the width, obviously not much happens because it's maintaining the height. But if I adjust the height, it will always snap, right? It's going to be very dynamic. So that's how easy it is to create it. It doesn't matter what you type in here. Again, you can adjust your margins. You can say on the width, let's do like a 50 pixel margin. And you can type anything you want in here and it will always stay within the shape. So that's how easy it is to do the same thing using the tools that we already have. You can definitely check them out. The link to that is at the bottom of this video. But in the meantime, let's dive right into this tutorial. All right, so let's get started from scratch. Right now I have a blank composition, so we need to bring in some kind of text. And you can do it a number of different ways. You can press Control T to get the type tool, or you can click on this icon. And then we're just going to click on our composition here. We're going to say something like ukramedia.com. Okay. Now, as you can see, my anchor point is right here and it's kind of floating out here somewhere. So what I want to do, I want to center the anchor point to where it goes to the center of my text. I'm going to press Control Alt Home. It's a keyboard shortcut. And when you do that, it's going to center it, which is exactly what I need. And next, I'm going to select it, press Control Home, and then it's going to center to the composition. So that's great. However, even though we centered our anchor point to our text, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be there. So if you change this text to something like, if you add like a lowercase j or a g, that's a classic example here, you can see that it has shifted. It's no longer the center of my text. Or let's do this. What if I have multiple lines, right? As you can see, it's no longer the center of my text. So the reason why I'm showing you this, because we need to find a way to use expressions to where we can code this in a way to where this anchor point will always be the center of our text. So let's do that. I'm going to undo a couple of times. I'm going to select this text. Let's rename this, press enter. I'm going to say text layer. And then I'm going to select it again, press A to reveal the anchor point. So this is the property that we're going to mess with. And as you can see, if I move it like that, anchor point moves. But what we need to do, we need to create an expression for it by pressing Alt click on the stopwatch. So now we're going to drive this property with an expression. And by that, I mean with some kind of code. So don't freak out. I know coding can be a bit intimidating, but just hang in there. Take a deep breath. So here's what we're going to do. The outcome of our expression has to match to this value. In other words, this value is a two-dimensional value. It's an array of two numbers. So our final statement here has to be two-dimensional value. It has to be an array. And in expressions, we write arrays with square brackets. So like this, open and close. So within here, we're going to say something like 11, let's do comma 22. Now, whatever the first number is that I type in here will be applied to the first value in here. And the second value will be applied to that right there. But notice this one and that one, they match. So if I click away, you can see we have 11 and then 22, just like it is here. So we can build up on that. Like I'm just trying to explain how things work for those of you that may not know how to like write code in here. So let's do something like this. I'm going to change 11 to X and then 20 to Y. Now those are just keywords. If I click away, nothing happens. It freaks out. It says, like, what are those? And right above it, we have to define it. So we're going to say, all right, come down, take a chill pill. We're going to say X, you're going to be 11, right? So now X has some kind of value. We defined what X is, right? So now this X will be 11. Okay, then we're going to say Y, you're going to be, and let's do 22. And by the way, semicolon, it's like a period in coding, right? When you do semicolon, you're basically saying, all right, move on to the next line. So now when I click away, notice X is 11, so we define it in here. And now X is applied to the first value, so we get 11. And then Y is 22, and Y is applied to the second value, and that's why we get 22. So it makes sense, right? So I just want to show you that's how we were able to split both of these into separate lines of code. It's just more appealing to code that way. So now I can just work on one line at a time. So I can work on X, which is like the width, left and right, and then Y, which is up and down. So next what I want to do, I want to do this. So I want to take this anchor point, right now it's out here, and on the X, I want to send it all the way to the left. How can I make that happen? Well, right here, we're going to replace this 11. If I press 0, watch this. So it just stays right here. But if I type something like this, I'm going to say source rect at time. And source rect at time is it's just a method that we use to get either the width, the height, like the left, the top of an object. So it's just a method, right? It just helps us to get some kind of property. So I'm saying I'm using this method, and I'm going to say give me left. In other words, anchor point go all the way to the left. So now, as you can see, it went all the way to the left. That's good, right? Then I'm like, hey, we're getting somewhere. But what if I want to go all the way to the right? How would I do this? So I would just do the following. I would copy this, and I would just say, hey, left is the starting point. So let's build up on that. I'm going to say plus. Instead of left, we're going to say width. Because remember, we are on X, so it has to do with left and right. So I'm saying we are starting at the left, then add the width of this text. So then it's going to jump all the way right here. So if I click away, notice the anchor point is now right there, which is good. But we want for it to be in the center. So what I need to do, I would just say, give me, instead of width, let's still use width. I'm going to say divide that value by 2, and then it would give me half of the width, right? Then it would give me half, and it will position it right here exactly where I want it to be. So when I click away, there you have it. So that's working. So let's use the same logic for Y, for up and down. Okay, now instead of 22, I'm going to say, again, source rect at time. It kind of like fills it up for you, so you don't have to memorize this thing. Just remember source rect. And then we're going to say, let's do top. Instead of left, we're doing top. When I click away, you can see it went all the way to the top. So that's good. Now it's at the top. So if I want for it to go all the way to the bottom, I would, basically add to it. I would say plus, and again, source rect, and instead of top, I would say height. So if I click away, it was here, right? Now it jumped all the way over here. But if I want to meet it halfway, if I want it to be in the center, instead of height, or I would still use height, but I would say take that height and then divide it by 2 and give me half of it. So then this anchor point would be right here. So when I click away, watch this, it's exactly in the center, which, you know, that's what we're going for here. But now let's try this. Let's put it through some tests. We're going to say J, G, and let's click away. So let's see what happens. As you can see, it's in the center. So that's awesome. Let's keep going. Let's add some lines of text. So let's, add some more. I can tell that it's moving already. So now you can see the anchor point is in the center. All right, so now that we have rigged our anchor point to where it is exactly in the center of our text, next, let's do this. But first, let me change it back to where it's just a one line, right? So next, what I want to do, I want to convert the scale property of this text. I'm going to select this, press S to see the scale property. So I want to change the value of it to where it's in percentage right now. I want it to change it to pixel. So that way I can have like the exact pixel control. And to do that, you can do it a number of different ways, but I'm going to use sliders. So I'm going to select this. We're going to go to Effect Controls panel. And in here, I'm going to bring in sliders. So right click, we're going to go to Expression Controls. And really, if you don't know what they are, these expression controls, they are, think of them like buttons. And by itself, they do nothing. Like if you bring them in, like sliders right here, I'm going to bring one in. And right now, it's just a value, one-dimensional value. It doesn't do anything. You can pull on it. It doesn't change anything because, again, it's just a button that you can build your own menu using all of those expression controls. And you can link them up using expressions and then do something with them. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. I'm going to select this, press Enter to rename it. I'm going to say you're going to be X size. And then I'm going to select this again, press Control D to duplicate it, press Enter. We're going to rename this one to Y size. Okay, so this is going to be the X size, like the X size of our text. And for right now, let's set it to something like 600. Okay, and then Y size, right, is going to be the height of our text. We're going to set it to like 100 pixels. Okay, so now I'm going to use this X size and Y size, these pixel values, and we're going to use them in here for the scale property to where instead of this, it's going to look at those two. And to do that, we're going to use expressions. We're going to press Alt-click on the stopwatch to create an expression. So now this expression is going to be driving this property. And first, let's split the two into two separate lines like we have before. We're going to say X, you're going to be, let's just say 100 for right now. And then Y, you're going to be 100 as well. And then we're going to marry them together, X and Y. So that way it speaks the same language. So when I click away, not much has happened, but we have separate lines of code. And in here, here's what I want to do. So instead of 100, we're going to type 600 for right now, and then we're going to link it up to this slider. So we're going to say 600 pixels. That's how long I want it to be in width. So when I click away, it's not 600 because my composition is 1920 by 1080. So 600 would have been around here somewhere. But so it's not correct because, again, we're telling it to be 600 pixels, but it sees this property or this value as a percentage value. So we need to convert it into pixels. So to do that, I'm going to do the following. So I'm going to say this value, you're going to be a pixel value. So we're going to do a little formula. We're going to say divide by source rect at time. Again, it's a method that allows us to grab the width of this layer, this right here. So it's grabbing the width of our layer, of our text. And then we're going to say times 100. So when I click away, now it's exactly 600. Now I know this is correct because I can type, let's do 1920, and it's touching the edge of my composition. So it's perfect. So this is now a pixel value, like a correct pixel value. So what I want to do, I'm going to convert this into a variable. It's just a smart way of coding. You always want to do variable. I'm going to say X size. It's just a made up variable. It doesn't really mean anything. And right here, I'm going to say X size. We're going to give it some kind of meaning, right? So right here, we defined it, or we told it to be X size divided by, and X size needs to be something. So I'm just going to link it up to this X size value. Now, you can leave it as this and it'll be fine, but you want to be more specific because you want to say, this slider, even though we linked up to it, it has different properties. It has a name. It also has a value. So we want to say, we want to link up to this X size, but we want to keep going. We want to say we want the value. It's just If you leave it off, you'll be fine. Like After Effects will assume you want the first property, which is the value. But just to be correct, just to be exact, you don't want After Effects to be guessing. So X size, we are going to define it to be this 600. So whatever you type in here, that's what this value will be. Again, it's just a variable, but it means a number. So now when I click away, you can see we can determine the width with just one slider, which is really handy. So we're going to say 1280, 1920. Yeah, it's working. So I'm going to say 600 for right now. So that's the X. And we're going to repeat the same process for the Y. Let's create a variable. We're going to say Y size. And again, it's going to be this Y size value. So we just point to it and we're going to say value. And then we're going to do the same concept like we did here in here, right? We're going to say Y size, which is just a variable that means a number, 100, right? And then we're going to divide it by source rect at time, which is a method that we use to get either the height, the width of the layer. So we're going to say this time we want the height, and then we're going to say times 100. So now when I click away, you can see we can control the width and the height. So in a way, it's taken this layer and it's converting the scale property to where we can adjust it based on pixel value. So I'm going to bring in a rectangle, and it's going to make more sense when I do that. So let's bring in, click here, get a rectangle tool, double click, and now we have a shape layer that's a rectangle. And if you go deep into it, you can see that we have a size value, and it has like the 1920 by 1080, so it's an X and Y. You can uncheck this, so you can control this. I always get annoyed by this. I'm going to select this, press S twice to solo it. I like to split these two into separate sliders. So I'm going to select this, go to the Effect Control panel, and right here we're going to right click. We're going to go to Expression Controls Slider. And again, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to say X size, duplicate it, and we're going to do Y size. Again, it's repetitive stuff, but I think it's good for you. So Alt click on the stopwatch to convert this. And instead of doing the whole X and then we assigned it, let me show you a different way. So I'm just going to do square brackets. And within here, I'm just going to do, you can do a number of different ways. We're going to say the first value is going to be this slider, again, dot value. And then the second value, comma, is going to be that one. So it's much easier to do it this way, but it's more messy. But sometimes, you can do it. But again, if you understand that just the first value is going to be applied to this, the second value is going to be applied to that, then you understand what's going on. So when we click away, obviously it disappeared. And the reason why, because X size and Y size are set to 0. So now we can, expand on this and do something with it. So that's good. All right, so now I can just hide this because, before to get to the size property, you had to hike all the way over here and it's just messy. But now we can just, click on it and it's right here. Or you can press E and see it in your timeline, right? We can do this. Also, if you press Control Alt and then click on any of these, or Control Alt Shift, I'm sorry, and click on it, then it will disappear. So now it looks a lot, more clean and more enjoyable to work with. So we have the X size and the Y size of this shape in pixels, which is really handy. So now here's what we can do. And so we have also the X and Y size of our text layer in pixels. So I'm going to select this, press E to reveal those as well in our timeline. And let's reveal them. Control Alt Shift, click on these to hide them. So we have more real estate here. Let me pull up on this some. That's good. So now, watch this. So if I want for this text to be always the size of this shape, I would just link the X size that we just rigged up, it's in pixels, to the X size of this shape layer. And now as you can see, it's perfect. And then the same thing for the Y size, I can link it up. And now it's stretching, right? So I can adjust right here the X size and the Y size of this shape, and it's working. So we're gonna select this, press S to go back to the scale property. If you want to be maintaining the aspect ratio, again, you can change this to X, and then it'll work, right? You can still adjust this, it's working. But in this example, it works better with the rectangle so that you can see what I'm talking about. But when the Y gets smaller, it's not working. So I want it to where it's adjusting to the width, but also the height as it gets smaller, right? All right, so right now this value is smaller than the Y, right? But then at some point, the Y becomes smaller than the X. And then that's when I want to switch to Y only, right here, to where it adjusted the height only. So we're going to fix that, and it's going to make sense here in a second, using another method called math period minimum or maximum. I'll show you here in a second. So let's create a new variable. I love creating variables. They make so much more sense. So we're going to say, let's call it smallest value. It's just a made up English. It means nothing right now, but we're going to tell it to be something. We're going to say, hey, let's use a method called math period minimum. And really what this method does, whatever you type in here, you can type like 11, 22, 33, 44, you get the idea. So it's going to take all the numbers that you type in here, and it's going to give you the minimum. So I'll show you here in a second. So if I click away, not much happens, but if I use throw in front of it, when I click away, you can see this value right here, this variable gives me 11. Right now, if I get rid of the smallest one, 11, it's going to go to 22, right? 22. Now I can change this and I can say, give me maximum, and it's going to give me 55, right? So again, whatever you type in here, it's going to give you either the smallest or the biggest value. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but and usually I would edit things out, but I want you to see the struggles. I want you to kind of explain how I arrive at things, and I think it will come in handy. So instead of max, we want the minimum value, right? We always want the smaller of the two, the X or the Y. So we're going to say X and Y. So between X and Y, always give me the smallest one. So when I click away, not much happens. But now what I want to do, I'm going to use this variable to apply it to both X and Y. Okay, so now obviously if I expand on height, let's do it right here so you can see it better right there. So I'm adjusting the width, it's fine, but as long as my height is where it's at, it's going to be always adjusting to width. But when my height becomes smaller than the text, watch this, then it shrinks. So now it's really, really smart, and you get the point. So again, I hope I'm not complicating things, but I just want to explain that the code that I'm writing here is really practical. It's very common sense kind of code. You just need to understand what methods do and stuff like that. And again, in our course on expressions, I talk more about that stuff. So let's keep going. What if I wanted to create some kind of margin? Because right now it's touching the edge right now when it's fitting to the width, but also the height. So if I, crank up on the height, or down, I'm sorry, you can see it's touching the edge. But I want to create margins on both. Let's say 50 pixel margin. How would I make that happen? Well, let's create variables for them up top here. We can say X margin. And again, it's made up English. I'm going to say, let's do 50 pixels, but I want it to be 50 pixels on one side and also the other side. So it would be 100, right? And I'm going to type, let's do 100. Okay. And then we're going to do Y margin, and I'm going to say 100 as well. So now if I click away, not much happens because we just define variables. Now we need to plug them in somewhere. So what I want to do, I want to do the following. So I'm going to type, let's add it to the final value. So we have the value that we get from here. And what I need to do, I need to just subtract margins from it. So the X margin on the X size, I'm going to say, hey, let's subtract minus right here, this margin. And for the Y, we're going to do the same thing, subtract, and we're going to subtract Y margin. So now, watch this. You can see, well, there it goes. On the width, we have a little gap here, right? And when we pull down on this Y size, you can see as it gets closer within 50 pixel margin, it's going to start doing that. Anyway, you get the idea. So let's keep going on this. What if instead of typing it in here, I want to be able to do it with a slider? So I don't want to constantly go to the code and adjust the margins, right? And do all this stuff. I mean, you can do it that way, but it's not very practical. So to do that, here's what we need to do. I'm going to create sliders again. So make sure you select this text, right click here in the effects control panel, expression controls, slider control, and we're going to change this one to X margin, duplicate this, and then enter again, Y margin. And then we're just going to point to them. Instead of 50 for the X margin, we're going to say, hey, grab it from here, dot value, and then we're going to say multiplied by 2, because I want, if we type 50 pixels, meaning for one side, I want to be applied 50 pixels on the other side as well. So 50 times 2, it'll be 100 altogether. So that's why I'm saying times 2. And then we'll do the same thing here. Y margin, we're going to link this up to Y margin slider. And we're going to say we want the value, and then times 2. So when I click away, there you go. So right now it's set to 0, but we can quickly adjust. And yeah, it's that simple. So really, that's how easy it is to set this up. As you can see, it's very dynamic. And now you can alter the size. And not only that, but watch this. You can type anything you want. So you can type anything, and you can keep going and keep going and keep going. And it's going to always fit within the margins and stuff like that. So you can say something like, learn more about expressions at, I put one too many S's. There you go. Expressions at, and I can say something like ukramedia.com/expressions. There you go. And not only that, I can alter like the size of it. We can go over here and make this smaller. It's very dynamic, as you can see. We can adjust the text altogether, right? We can do some gaps. And anyway, it's super cool. And again, you can adjust the shape and it'll work just fine. So that's how you do it using After Effects and expressions.